Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to episode 2 of Let's Talk Comics. I'm your host, Jim Viscardi, and congratulations, you just found your new favorite comic book podcast. Let's Talk Comics is powered by Image Comics and is here to bring you the best conversations with the creators behind the work we all love. We're going to talk about how they broke into the industry, how they've stayed in the industry, and what we could look forward to as far as projects they've got coming up. The show drops twice a month with bonus episodes starting soon. I promise they are coming. Some of them just needed to get a little TLC and remastered a little bit. But before we do anything else, I need to give everyone who has checked out episode 1 a huge thank you for the kind words. The feedback has been so great. I have been wanting to do this again for so long, and I'm glad I'm able to do it. So if you haven't listened to the first episode, check that out. And if you haven't listened to the show at all at any point in time, go check out the trailer. All right. Now, one more thing of business, and then we'll get to the show. A lot of people have been asking, hey, how do I support the show? There are 2 phenomenal, easy ways to support this very, very free show. Head on over to Apple Podcasts or head on over to Spotify, leave a 5-star review. It really helps push the show up in the almighty algorithm, and it's the easiest way for others to discover your best-kept secret. And if I read your review on the air, which I plan to start doing as soon as they start popping up, you will get your very own Let's Talk Comics sticker sent straight to your mailbox. You can put it on your laptop. You can put it on a notebook. You can put it on a stop sign. I don't care where you put it, but you'll get one for leaving a 5-star review. All right. Now let's talk about today's guest. If you stacked every comic book that Jason Aaron has ever written, that pile would easily tower over most modern comic book writers' careers. He has redefined iconic Marvel characters like Thor, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, and he's weaved some of the most compelling and epic tales of our time. Jason, no doubt, has left a mark on the world of comics. He's tackled massive crossovers, high-stake events, and he's also brought us deeply personal, intimate stories that stick with you long after you've turned the last page. And not only that, Jason's creator-owned work has earned him some of the most well-deserved praise in the industry. And, let's be honest, he has one of the best beards in the business. Today, Jason Aaron joins me on Let's Talk Comics for an in-depth conversation where we will take a stroll down memory lane and we'll go through his incredible career. Oh, actually, I lied. We go through his career, but we only really get to about like halfway through. But we fast forward a little bit because he does have a new project coming out, Bug Wars, from Image Comics that we needed to talk about because he joins back with his collaborator on Conan the Barbarian, Mahmud Asrar, for Bug Wars, which is absolutely phenomenal. So to hear him talk about it is a lot of fun. We talk a little bit of wrestling at the very end. And before I let him go, Jason gives 2 great recommendations for someone looking for something to read in case you're into that kind of thing. All right. Well, that's enough blathering. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's talk comics. Jason, welcome.
Thanks, Jim. That was a great intro. I appreciate it.
So you gotta hype them up a little bit, right? And get ready for this. Look, I told you before we started recording. This is one that I have been looking forward to. It's one I've wanted to do for a very, very long time. In a lot of cases, because you and I really, kind of crossed paths originally when you were getting your start at Marvel and I was there, and it is so bananas to see all of the work that you've done. Do you ever have the time to just kind of step, like, I know you've got all your books on your bookshelf, but do you ever get a chance to be able to take a step back and look at everything that you've done, or is part of it, like, I have to imagine some parts of it are a blur too. Like what is it? What does it feel like? At where you are now, taking a look back.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely parts of it that have become a blur. I think I've been, in this business long enough that I'll be doing a signing and somebody will bring a book up and I'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot I wrote that. I keep busy and I always genuinely feel like the thing I'm most excited about is what I'm working on today. Which, I mean, to me is like how I should feel, right?
Right.
But I never I felt like I had to fake that, through 15 years of being exclusive at Marvel, and now, the last couple of years being free to kind of work all over the place. Like I've been lucky in that I'm doing stuff I want to do. Nobody's ever forcing me to do anything. I write the stuff that I'm excited about, and it never gets old. Like I'm always excited and always grateful that I get to do this for a living. So yeah, I think I'm just busy. I don't spend a lot of time going back and reading my old stuff. I did just move, like a couple months ago. I moved, and turns out I have a lot of stuff. Being a nerd for 50 years and writing comics professionally for like 20 years means you accumulate a lot of things. I have a lot of things, a lot of comics, books, toys. The office I've set up now, I'm surrounded by trades and long boxes and literally the toys I played with as a kid. So some of it, that's awesome. That's a miserable experience, the actual moving part of it. But when you get moved,
look, every comic book fan listening to this is like,
oh yeah, they all feel my pain.
They know.
There's literally a long box over here that's got my blood on it, like from just like a blister or something, moving those fucking boxes where I just smeared blood across it. Yeah. But the good part is when you're getting your shelves set up and unpacking those boxes and putting books back on them. So that's one of those times where I would sit and like flip through a book I hadn't flipped through in years and be like, oh yeah, this one was pretty good.
Right. So it's so funny because I know you're a wrestling fan, and wrestlers are almost notorious in almost any interview. They almost never watch their old matches. They never like to go back and relive some of that stuff.
Sure.
It sounds like that's kind of the case for you, not necessarily the case, or is it more just a nice surprise sometimes when you open something old? Or
pretty much, yeah. I don't go back and read old stuff. Maybe I should have sometimes, to see what good or bad I could get from it. But I mean, I have on occasion. Like Scalped just came out in omnibus format. Scalped was my first ongoing series, first big book at Vertigo. Me kind of learning what the hell I was doing. So because it was coming out in omnibus, I wanted to go back and reread them all. And, there were a couple grammatical errors and things I wanted to correct and write an intro. So anyway, I sat down and reread all 60 issues of Scalped for the first time, I don't know, since they were coming out, I guess.
Oh, wow.
Which was an interesting experience. I mean, there were times, it made me cringe a little bit of like, oh, I wouldn't do that now. I wish I...
Can you give us an example of something that, like, the current Jason cringes that younger Jason did?
I don't know. I don't want to point out my own flaws to people. I will let,
okay, that's right. They're learning experiences
them out themselves. I mean, I think, again, Scalped was me learning how to write, learning how to sort of tell a big story like that. I think I was struck by those things of like, oh, I wish I had done that differently. I did not change anything like that. I corrected mistakes, but I didn't go back and try to special edition it and rewrite stuff. It's like, it is what it is. But I was also struck just by like the passion and hunger of it. It felt like, oh, this is a dude who's, in a band that's been playing in his garage for years, and this is his first chance to go on stage, and he's absolutely given it his all, Right. So I could, there was good and bad I took from that experience, I guess, of rereading them.
So the job you have now clearly is a dream job. Was it the dream job? What was young Jason, in like middle school or high school wanting to be before maybe realizing that this could be the thing that you do?
No, this was always the thing. I mean, from a pretty early age, I said I wanted to write comics. And then kind of always just wanted to write. I think the comics part of it would drift away for a bit because it seemed impossible. I had no idea how to go about doing that. I mean, living in the small town in Alabama, in the days when you pretty much needed to live in New York City to work in the comic book publishing, and New York City to me seemed like it was a million miles away. Right, couldn't have been further away. So that part of it maybe drifted in and out, but I always wanted to write, like from the time I first figured out that was the thing you could do and make it a job. I'm like, well, that's what I have to do.
Right.
And I was always pursuing that in whatever way I could, whether it's writing anything I could write, like in school, if it was a school project or annual staff or poetry contests or whatever. I was doing that, and went to college as a journalism major, and realized I hated journalism and dropped out, and eventually went back to school and got an English degree, and I had no idea what I was doing with that. But just through that whole experience, all of that, just writing constantly, tons and tons of stuff, which I hope no one will ever read, that I will, try to make sure dies with me whenever I go.
Right. What was the comics community like for you as a fan, kind of growing up? Was it, for some folks it was could have been a solitary experience in a sense, just like, just making the ritual of going and getting issues off wherever you would have gotten them from. But I know for some folks, they had a bunch of friends who were into it and things like that. What was that like for you? And were there kind of any formative moments?
Yeah, you might say my community was small, and it was me and one other dude in my school. My friend John was a big comic fan, bigger comic fan than I was, like when we first met. He was the one who told me, like, you should put these things in like bags and boards, right? And I was like, what is that? He was a big Marvel guy. I was more of a DC guy when we met, but we were like the two comic nerds in my small, middle school, and have stayed friends all that time. And he also loved to draw, and I loved to write. So it was like kismet that we would meet each other. But I mean, for me, that was kind of it. I didn't go to a comic book store until I was probably 15.
Oh, really?
There was one in Birmingham. There was no comic book store.
So did you pick them up off like a newsstand, or
yes,
rack?
spinner racks, drugstores, grocery store. There was a used bookstore in Jasper, the town I was born, where at some point I found like some copies of Vigilante, like those Alan Moore issues of Vigilante.
Nice.
There were direct market books that had just come from a comic book store somewhere, and I was like, "What is this?" And I subscribed to it. That was I think the only time I ever subscribed to a book, is I had a subscription to Vigilante, which I loved that book. But some point, I in my early teens, my mom took us to Dragon Con. That was like the closest convention. Or I think maybe there's Dragon Con, and then there was another Atlanta Con, like Fantasy Fest or something else. We went to both of those. But my first convention experiences were in Atlanta, and I went to Dragon Con for a lot of years and in a row there through my teens. So that was the first time of seeing, a convention center full of comics and nerds, and I felt like I was in heaven. So then my time in Alabama, is sort of a I'm sure a typical experience for a lot of people. Grew up reading comics, or once I found a comic shop, I shopped there, and it moved and then went out of business. So I moved to another shop, and it moved, and then maybe moved again, then went out of business. So I had, like, every relationship I had with a comic shop would be like 2-3 years, and I kept switching around. And there's still any of the shops I've ever been to in Birmingham are closed. Like the ones that are there now, I don't know. So it was like I never had one that I was, in a relationship with for more than like 4 years probably. just follow. But I always had a pull list somewhere, like since the day I first walked into the Wuxtree in Birmingham.
That's awesome.
I have had a pull list at one place or another.
What would you say is and you can't pick any of your own work, but like your comics prized possession?
Oh, like of actual books?
Yeah. It doesn't have to be like
question.
monetary value or whatever. But like what is the item that holds the most sentimental value to you?
I don't know. I've never thought about it in terms of just one. I mean, I've got most everything I've ever bought or had. So I've got all the ratty, dog-eared, cover fallen off copies that I first got off the spinner rack. They're on a spinner rack here in my office.
That's
so
awesome.
I've got the first one's like a issue World's Finest from 79 or 80. Its cover's completely detached. And there are a bunch of issues of DC Comics Presents and Superman, and then a bit later there was like Atari Force and Blue Devil and X-Men. So all those books that I actually picked up off the spinner rack.
You still have.
And some of them, like some of those Superman, I cut things out of them. Like I, cut one of the coupons out you could send in with $5,
Right.
and get a hunk of kryptonite. So I've got the comic still with the page cut out of it. So I love
That's
having
something
those.
we really need to bring back. We need to bring back the mail order
Absolutely.
tchotchke thing in comics.
We'll
That's
work
been
that
gone
out for
far too
Bug
long.
Wars. Like send in $5 and we'll send you an actual
We'll send you a bag of bugs.
insect. All right. Here's a bag of bed bugs,
Perfect.
courtesy of Image Comics.
That's right. Oh, love it. All right. Well, so let's fast forward a bit about and just you had mentioned that in your eyes having to break into the business meant you needed to be in New York or LA or something. You still managed to break in. So what can you talk about some of those early days of either preparing work or how you would pitch and what it was like to was it a grind for you or did you happen to get lucky? I mean, obviously talent speaks for itself in a sense, right? But I know sometimes trying to find the way in is different for everyone. So
I got lucky, but I also had been kind of preparing for my opportunity for a long time. I think I had never pitched anything comic wise until I entered a Marvel Comics talent search contest and won that. Right. So basically, the first real pitch I ever wrote got accepted as like a 10-page story in an issue of Wolverine, which is the first comic thing I ever did. And that was another 5 years before I had anything else coming out from Vertigo. So within those 5 years, I was pitching all kinds of stuff, kind of chasing, I think like a lot of people do, chasing, whatever head pops up out of the ground of like, oh, this editor, I have their email address. They responded to me. They showed some interest. What books do they edit? Okay, here's pitches for any of those. And none of that stuff, 5 years of pitching things, none of it ever led to anything. The only thing I got accepted was The Other Side at Vertigo, which I'd written the first script of work. The hardest I've ever worked on a script in my life was that very first one, and that was a Vietnam War book, and that got picked up by Vertigo. And but I kind of got that through by, I realized this is getting me nowhere, just sort of willy-nilly pitching to everybody.
Yeah.
Like, let me be specific about it. And so I looked at, what do I like to read? Like, what are the books right now that I'm really enjoying, and who edits those? And are there common denominator? Are there editors I can look at of like, oh, this guy edits 4 or 5 books that I really like. So chances are, if my stuff is going to appeal to somebody, probably this guy. So I ended up with 2 guys, and that was Will Dennis at Vertigo and Axel Alonso at Marvel. And Axel, of course, had also come from Vertigo. And I sent things to those 2 guys, and that's how I really broke into comics, kind of the second time.
What were the things you sent? Were they like specific kind of character stuff that you were that like they were character specific pitches? Were they like, hey, I've got this idea for a story and here's how I think it would go, kind of thing?
Well, I sent the pitch and the first issue script to the other side to Will, like a war book, which he turned down multiple times. And then I was persistent,
right,
as you have to be, but also polite and didn't just badger the shit out of him. And he eventually read it and really liked it and wanted to do it. Then that stuff I started to do at Vertigo, I sent that to Axel at Marvel, and that kind of brought me back to Marvel. But it was still, I think, being specific about who I was trying to get in touch with, knowing, even though I'd never met these guys at the time, I just felt like I think our sensibilities will be similar.
Sure. So the other side then was born of you in a sense, right? Like in that it was, it was a Vertigo book, so it was, your idea that you were able to bring. Was there, you had done the Wolverine short story, but having that kind of be your first thing and then jump into kind of the more character specific work for hire stuff, was there, was that easy? Was there something that you didn't necessarily expect having to then, because like those, with the other side, you followed your own rules for the most part, but then when you're, handed the keys to a character car, there's all kinds of insurance on that.
Well, I mean, at the time, doing the other side's a Vietnam War book. My cousin was a vet and a novelist. He wrote the book that Full Metal Jacket was based on, and I'd met a lot of his other Marine combat correspondents. So I was with that book, I very much did not want to fuck it up, because these guys would tell me, would have no qualms telling me that I had fucked it up. So I wanted to make them proud and make my cousin passed away, but wanted to, do right by him as well. So I did a ton of research on that book. And then the next book I'm doing after that was Scalped, which is a crime drama set on a modern native reservation, which is also heavily influenced by like the history of the American Indian movement. So again, things I don't have personal experience with that I did a ton of research for. So after those two research-heavy books, I think one of the first things I did was Ben Abernathy, who was at Wildstorm at the time, said, "Hey, do you want to write a Friday the 13th book?" And I was like, "Yes, absolutely. I don't have to do any research for that. I watched all those movies. So here you go." So yeah, it was nice to. I mean, I don't think you can replicate anybody's career in terms of how to break in. Like they're all so unique and different, and you just got to kind of, again, get lucky, but also make your own luck. And when the opportunities come along, be willing to like step up and give it your all and swing for the fences and do something that gets you attention one way or another, right? And gets you that next gig. So I don't know that. I mean, to me, it was all surprising along through that entire process. I never expected to actually win that Marvel Comics talent search contest.
But Scalped is an example of you really starting to taste like acclaim very early on in your career. Because I remember when Scalped was coming out, like people really loved that book, and so like how. Does that tint the glasses at all as you go? Like, is there? Because I think like for a lot of folks, who know you and or maybe have listened to other interviews done, like, what does Jason Aaron's swagger maybe kind of look like in a sense, and like, do you feel that maybe
I don't know that I've got any swagger.
You picked some of that up?
No, I think. To me, I think ignorance is bliss a little bit, right? Like, I mean, the other side came out. We got nominated for an Eisner for Best Miniseries. Scalped came out and got a lot of acclaim, and I'd go to conventions and people seemed to really like it. But I just didn't really pay much attention to any of that. Like,
Sure.
to me, this success hinged upon, do I get to keep doing this? Do I like it? Does Gara, who's drawing it, like it? My editor will.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are the people I am directly involved with, are they pleased? Yes, everybody's pleased, and we get to keep going. I get a career. I get paid. I get to pay the light bill with comic book money. That to me was really all I cared about and all I really saw. Like in those days, still like the early days of social media, where I wasn't being hit in the face with reviews, either positive or negative.
Right.
So I didn't. That was never really factored into it much. And I live in the suburbs of Kansas. I kind of, especially back in those days, early days of my career, my son was born the day after I finished the first issue draft of Scalped #1. So I wrote much of Scalped while pushing him around the neighborhood in a stroller, like waving at the other parents out for a walk, and I'm like making up stories about Red Crow killing people. For better or worse, like I feel like I've always been kind of insulated, or kept myself insulated from what people think of things.
Sure.
Pro or con. Yeah, you go to conventions and it's great to meet people who are affected by your work. It's great to meet other pros who've read your work. It's nice to win awards and all that stuff. But to me, just the award I've won is that I get to do this for a living, From day one up until now, that has not changed. Every day it still feels like I wake up and nobody's fired me today, so I just won another award, another day of getting to make up stories for a living.
I love it. One of your works that I go back to all the time, and I recommend it as much as I can, is the Secret Invasion tie-in of Black Panther.
Thanks.
To me, it is one of the best superhero comics, in my opinion, just kind of period. Like and I can't tell if, for me, that's when I was really coming into comics as a fan, and obviously, it was when I was kind of starting to work at Marvel. But every time I reread that, I absolutely love it. But so I'd love to hear a little bit about just kind of like what the early Marvel days were like for you. In that, what were some of the challenges maybe that going into kind of an environment like that? Because like you didn't necessarily just with that book in particular, not drop into just a character specific story, but it was a character story during a big major event. And so it feels like there were a bunch of different hoops to make sure that you had to jump through. What was that like?
I mean, that story in particular was pretty easy, and it was really just Axel, wanting a Secret Invasion tie-in for Black Panther, and just said, Skrulls invade Wakanda and do whatever you want. And I was like, cool, I can do that. And that was one of those stories. It was just 3 issues, right? So it was very much just, I'm going to make Black Panther and really all of Wakanda like as badass as I possibly can for 3 issues as they slaughter a bunch of Skrulls. I think that, the goals were really nothing more ambitious than that, like make them as badass as possible. But those days at Marvel were great. I mean, it's wild to look back now. It feels like it wasn't that long ago when I was like the new guy there. Me and Jonathan Hickman kind of came in at the exact same time. So we were the 2 new guys in that room, and coming into a room, like at a literal room, like at the retreats we would do, where you've got Bendis and Ed Brubaker and Matt Fraction and Jeff Loeb and guys who were huge names. So I was big fans of, and I knew Matt a little bit. He was living in Kansas City at the time, but it was intimidating to go into that room with a lot of big personalities, a lot of big creators, and just kind of find my place in it. And I, for the most part, just sort of did my own stuff. Did Ghost Rider, which sort of was over in its corner of the Marvel universe, and got involved with the X-Men stuff a lot of it with Kieran Gillen. And then even Thor, was, even though I did that for like 7 years, it was still for the most part kind of, I was off doing my own thing.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny you mentioned Hickman, because I think one of your other early works was some of the Top Cow pilot season.
That's right. Yeah, I did do one of those. Yeah, which we lost. We lost the. If you don't know remember what pilot season was, they would do, I don't know, 4 or 5 one-shots of different characters, and then fans would vote, kind of which one do you want to see more of. And I think we maybe came in dead last. We definitely lost the Ripclaw one,
right,
which was really fun.
The ones that won that year, I just pulled it up, was Cyblade by Josh Fialkov, and then I guess Velocity also won by Joe Casey. But it's crazy that some of the names that were involved during that, right? So it's like, it's Josh, it's Joe, it's yourself. Francis Manipul did some covers.
Cool.
It's early, Stefan Sajic work, and then the following year, right? Like that's where Hickman comes out of.
What was his? I don't.
His was a book called The Core. I think like that year it was. It could have been like it was like. Creator owned or just creative ideas, not necessarily tied to some of the existing Top Gun characters the first hand.
That's wild. We should have a pilot season reunion. Get everybody back together.
There we go. Well, so you get in at Marvel, and it really feels like the career then begins to snowball, right? You mentioned Ghost Rider, and you can ask any Ghost Rider fan or any fan of that type of book, and they point to that being as one of the best. And like I alluded to it in the intro for this, is that like you've had the opportunity to really come in, do long runs with characters and redefine them in a way that a lot of creators, more modern creators, don't necessarily get to do as much. Obviously the market and the environment at Marvel at the time is obviously very different,
right.
And so you being able to go and do a run on something like Ghost Rider and do what felt like anything you damn well pleased was really cool. Was really cool to see. What I'd like to maybe hear you talk about is a bit, was like, how do you begin to plan for something like that, right? Because I feel like at any given point working on any book, you could be taken off it or it can end it at any given time. But the Ghost Rider is probably one of your first ones where you were given a lot of leeway and a lot of runway to do something. And so like, did you only initially have maybe like one arc planned and then it just, you kind of went one into the other, or was there a mission statement for something like that?
Yeah, I definitely had a bigger plan already in mind when I took that over. And I don't remember exactly how many arcs we did, maybe 4. I mean, the book didn't sell great, like in kind of the last arc of it we did as a mini series, Heaven's on Fire.
Yep.
So I think I can look at, The Other Side was my first real book at Vertigo. Probably still, as of today, the lowest selling book I've ever done. But, got nominated for an Eisner, got the Will at Vertigo liking what I was doing on The Other Side, got me Scalped.
Yep.
Which Scalped has kind of gotten me everything else I've done. And then Ghost Rider, first big thing I do at Marvel, probably the lowest selling Marvel book I've ever done. But that book, did have people who liked Ghost Rider really, really seemed to dig it. People at Marvel really dug that book. So that book got me a lot of other work too. So I think some of it, you look back over your career, and if they're the books that feel more special, the books that feel more important to your overall career, they're not all just the books that topped the sales chart, right?
Sure.
It's like, what did you make a statement with? What did you, do something interesting with? What did you do that kind of got people's attention one way or another? Maybe it wasn't 400,000 people's attention. Maybe it was a much smaller number, but the Ghost Rider was a very beneficial book to me, like overall in my Marvel career.
So then at that point, when do you go from actively trying to pitch versus, hey, we have these openings, do you want them, kind of part in your career?
I mean, kind of from the moment I came in at Marvel, Axel was good at kind of asking me for pitches for specific things, or sort of slotting me into, offering me things, which I think he was always really good. I think the best editors are good about when you find somebody who's new and raw and doesn't have much of a name, like if you recognize, like, this is what this person is good at, now let me put them in positions to succeed. Let me put them in the right spot where they can do their best work, instead of just, well, this book is on fire, so let me throw bodies at it to try to put it out. Right. So I think he was very thoughtful about where he, things he offered me, or puts books he put me on. So Ghost Rider and the Wolverine stuff I did, and Punisher, and those were all kind of things. Well, Punisher was one where I very much, campaigned for it and asked for it. But a lot of the other things were just, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So yeah.
So who were some of the early bucket list characters for you then?
I mean, I really, like I said, I had that period where I felt like I was pitching to every editor I could, and then I sort of transitioned and focused on specific editors. And at that point, I realized, like, oh, the actual flesh and blood humans involved in this equation are more important than just chasing characters.
Right.
So once I was kind of working with Axel, it was like, well, what does he edit? Well, he edits the X-Men, he edits Punisher, and I was like, cool, like I can figure out stories for those guys. So it became about that, instead of let me work with people I want to work with, instead of I just want to write Spider-Man, or I just want to write Swamp Thing, or whatever, right? Like, so I for the most part have not had a bucket list of character. I mean, there's characters, if you go look through all these long boxes sitting next to me in my basement, there are characters you'll notice I have bought a lot of comics featuring this guy or this team or whoever. Right. But that, for the most part, has not influenced, like, my business decisions or things that's, stories that sparked my brain at a certain moment in time, like Thor. I wasn't a huge Thor fan as a kid. Just hadn't read that much. So I do have a short bucket list, that I for the most part keep to myself. But I mean, I've made no secret of the fact that Conan was on there.
Yep.
Uncle Scrooge was on there. Got to check that box last year. So there are a few that are on there. But that certainly in my time at Marvel, again, I grew up as a DC kid.
Right.
So I didn't. If I had a bucket list, it wouldn't have been a long one of Marvel characters. Right. I mean, I loved, like the Kraven's Last Hunt storyline. I loved the Mutant Massacre stuff on X-Men. But I didn't know about as much about Marvel stuff as I did DC growing up.
So as you're getting more and more involved, and your workload is getting bigger and bigger, you're obviously meeting a ton more different creators, fellow writers, but you're getting introduced to artists and things like that. Talk to me about the collaboration process a bit, in that, like, are you someone who has a fairly strict script style in a sense, or are you do you change it up depending on who you're working with, artist wise, and things like that? Like, how has that kind of evolved over the years for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would always hear about writers who could change their script style depending on who they were working with, and just write the best version of a script for whoever that artist is. And I quickly figured out I don't know how to do that. I think one of the first things I got offered at Marvel was a Wolverine one-shot with Howard Chaykin. Okay. I was a huge fan of Howard's. I loved American Flag and Black Hawk and pretty much everything he had done. So I was very intimidated of getting to work with him for the first time. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go reread a bunch of American Flag, and I'm going to sit down and write a great script for Howard Chaykin. and I wasn't long into it before I was like, I don't know how to do that. I can't. I'm not Howard. I can't write like Howard. Like I only know how to write a script. Tell this is the story the way I see it, right?
Sure.
And whoever that artist is, to give them room to like interpret it however they need to. If you want to draw it exactly like I broke it down, great. If you see it differently and think there's a better way to tell the story, great. It's not carved in stone. It's a collaboration. So I pretty quickly abandoned any thought of like, oh, I'm going to write a script for this artist or that artist. Like, I don't know how to do that. I mean, to me, it's a very telling that story is a very like personal experience. It's just me alone in a dark room. I just think about it as that script beyond just, I don't worry about the process of who's drawing it. Is it ever going to become a comic? Does it just stay as this script and never leave my computer? It doesn't matter. Like, it's just, this is the way I see it, And I think I've through my process of figuring out how to write a script, working with Will and Axel and great editors, like it's really just that. It's like, this is the way I see it. Try to give the artists what they need and kind of stay out of their way, right? Like, I'm not trying to dictate camera angles or tell, Chris Pachalo or Esad Ribic how to draw. They don't need me to tell them. I'm terrible at drawing. So I don't need to tell anybody how to draw anything, but I think I've figured out like how to give them what they need to get excited and tell the story in their own way.
What would you say are some pretty key components as far as telling a great story in a sense, right? And that, like, I think one of the great things about your whole library of work is really how versatile I think you are in a sense, right? Like, you mentioned not being a huge Thor fan, but obviously wrote Thor for a very long time. And Thor is a very different book than Wolverine and the X-Men. And so as far when you're approaching these new books and thinking about the characters, what are some of the really key things for you, when you go into kind of the planning process?
Well, to clarify, I did become a big Thor fan.
Sure. No, right. No,
I didn't. Yes. I wasn't a big Thor fan growing up. So I think that was, an important part of like, to me, the most important thing is clarity, right? It's clarity of vision. Like, do I see who this character is, what they mean to me, what they represent, what they want, what they're afraid of. Like, what's cool and interesting about this character? Sure. Like, I need to have clarity about what that is, and clarity about what kind of story I'm trying to tell. Like, what is it? Not just the beats of what happened, but what is it about? Like, what does it look like, sound like, smell like? Like, the more clarity I have around that project, like the better it's going to be. The more I'm going to be able to put it onto the page and translate it, communicate it to the artist. So I think just that clarity, and part of that is just like with me with Thor, that I had to go back to the beginning and sit down and read, from the first issue, the Lee Kirby stuff, and understand like what did this character mean to these guys, and why did they want to tell Thor stories, and what were they about, and looking at how that character changed over time, and just so I think once you have that clarity of like, oh, okay, like, I'm excited about this character now because of these things. I like these things about them. I can see how I can do that. I can see how I can tell cool stories with that. And then you have to show your work, right? Like, don't any of these characters, in terms of work for hire stuff we're talking about, a lot of the readers come to the party already invested, right? They know the character's history. They have favorite stories from over the years. But plenty of people come to the party having no idea who this character is. They've never read a single comic of their adventures before. Maybe they've never read a comic at all. So I think you always just have to show your work and excitement and passion on the page. Like, to me, like the thing that turns me off the most is if I pick up a comic and I don't feel like you're excited to be writing this or you're excited to be drawing this. That right away makes me not excited to read it. Like I want to, even if it's a character I don't give a shit about, right? Like I don't care about. I mean, I didn't grow up as a huge Transformers fan, right? As a more of a G.I. Joe guy. But man, like you pick up, the Daniel Warren Johnson's Transformers, it is dripping with passion for those characters, and you can't help but be excited and invested because he's so excited and invested, and it pulls you in. So I love those books where creators can make me excited about a character that I previously had no connection to whatsoever. But to do that, you got to show it. You got to put it on the page. So to me, I think that's, again, starts with that clarity, and then it's got to be translated into the work.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you one more Marvel question before we jump into. I want to talk about inevitably getting into what became Southern Bastards. You had a really interesting and unique opportunity at Marvel that hasn't been replicated since in doing Avengers versus X-Men. In that, like, there were a lot of chefs in that kitchen.
Right.
So what was what was that just sort of like? 'Cause I remember, like I remember being in that room and hearing everyone break it down, but then like you and everyone else on that team had to go and do the work, and to me it sounded like it. And it got done, and it was a ton of fun. But like, what was it like actually doing and putting those pieces together?
I mean, yeah, it was a wild experience. I think, the whole experience with me going to those Marvel retreats was like a learning process, because writing for me has always been that very solitary experience, and then suddenly you're in a room with 20 other writers and all of Marvel editorial, and you're figuring out stories together. So that's like a different skill set, different muscle to flex than kind of what I was used to. And I still having been in those retreats for years, to the point where I went from being the new guy to suddenly I'm looking around and like I'm the old guy in the room.
The last guy's left.
I still pick and choose my spots. I don't talk a ton. I try to only say something when I think it's worth saying, but I think I did kind of get better at being able to navigate those rooms. And so Avengers versus X-Men was kind of just an extension of that. Like by that point I was friends with all those guys who were working on it. We'd all been in that room together. I think we all respected each other. We're all very different creators, so it was wild for all of us to figure out that story together, but a lot of it was me and Bendis kind of doing the heavy lifting in terms of the overall plotting, and then everybody kind of wrote their own pieces. And it was really cool working with Brian, who I'd been a big fan of before I ever came to Marvel, before I ever started writing comics. And he was, I've been really lucky, I think, in the experiences I've had being a new guy coming into the industry and meeting a lot of really, incredible, hugely successful creators who have pretty much to a T been nothing but kind and welcoming to me, like a kid fresh off the banana boat, and Brian was certainly that way. Couldn't have been an easier, better collaborator.
Right. Cool. All right. Well, so it's funny. You had mentioned, obviously, in talking about what makes a good story for some of the work for hire stuff and in superheroes and characters in general. But when you are tasked with putting something together that is yours, how does that process change, if at all? Because in these cases, in cases like, with a story like Southern Bastards, you're starting from the ground up. There's no canon. There's no backstory. How do you grab how do you grab a reader early on in a creator-owned book, learning all what you've learned, in your ongoing career as a writer?
Yeah, there's good and bad parts of that, right? Like the good thing is you can do whatever you want in that world. It's completely yours. The more challenging part is, you don't get to stand on the shoulders of Jack Kirby and anymore, right, or all the other greats who've worked on any of those Marvel and DC books over the years. So yeah, I mean, with Southern Bastards, it felt very much like it was time to do a story that was more personal for me. Like even the creator-owned work I'd done before, Other Side was personal in a very specific way because of my cousin, and Scalped was kind of the first chance I had to do an ongoing book, and there's my life is intertwined in that book in all sorts of strange ways. My son, who again was born like the same week as the main character of the book, shares the same name. They're both named Dashiell. But Southern Bastards was different, and for the first time I was writing about where I grew up, where I was from. It was like a book set in a small town in Alabama, kind of modeled after a couple of places where we lived there, and very much about my love of football. Which is, football's generally not a basis for a successful comic book series. But again, it kind of goes back to like, well, what do I want to read? What do I think is interesting? And I hope, I feel like part of the book's success was that not everybody who's reading it gave a shit about football, right? Like, but even if you didn't, you could get the passion from it, and you could get like what it meant to these characters and the drama of it. And so I love that. Same way, like I think if you read Daniel's Do a Power Bomb, like you don't have to be a wrestling fan to love that book. If you are, great. But I think you can make anybody feel that passion if you feel it.
Oh, I love that. So what would you say maybe you learned during that experience that you then took? Because I think like one of your next projects, I mean, you'd done something with Ron Garney, you did Men of Wrath, but then you re-teamed up with R.M. Guerra for The Goddamned. And so was working on The Goddamned, did it feel like getting the band back together, or because I feel like at this point both of you had done a bunch of a bunch of stuff. Like, were you guys like two almost? How different of a creator were you doing Scalped than you were in doing The Goddamned?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know exactly if I can answer that. I mean, certainly by the time Gary and I started doing The Goddamned, our relationship was very different. I mean, when we were doing Scalped, we were deep into that book before he and I had ever met in person. But by the time we were doing The Goddamned, like I'd been to his house in Barcelona, and we'd hung out in multiple cities around the world, and I understood his sensibilities and he understood mine, and so we were friends by that point. And The Goddamned again felt like a personal book, even though it's a story about guys killing each other with rocks and sharpened bones. Like it's inspired by me growing up in the church, growing up Southern Bastard, or growing up Southern Baptist, and growing up with the stories of the Bible. And still, even though I've been an atheist a long time, being fascinated with those stories, and I pitched a version of The Goddamned to Vertigo back when I first pitched Scalped. So it's a book I'd wanted to do for a long, long time. But when you read it, it's also just, it's like a part caveman story, part like end of the world story, part, spaghetti western samurai, just told with very primitive weapons.
Did the process change at all, or was it like just kind of stepping back into it and getting on a bike with with Guerrero?
Yeah, I don't think the process changed at all. I mean, if anything, we understood each other a lot. I mean, Guerra, I think, is I've at this point, I would imagine I've worked with Guerra on more comics than anyone else. I mean, he didn't do all 60 issues of Scalped, but he did most of them.
Right.
So I know kind of what to give Guerra, what he likes. Like he wants the emotions of the scene. He wants like what characters are thinking and feeling. If it's opposite than what they're saying, whatever. He wants all the emotions more than I need to tell him.
Sure.
What they need to be doing. It's just what are they feeling? So, and then I just get out of his way and let him go crazy.
Well, so it's so interesting because I feel that comics, unlike any other medium, is able to play with emotion and portray emotion in a way really unlike anything else. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that in building emotion and making people feel emotion in during the process of writing a comic, right? Like I you mentioned that a lot of stuff that you've done has been incredibly personal to you, and so I have to imagine some of that bleeds out into it. But what goes into really kind of making a reader feel emotion or shock or awe or really like any of that when you're putting a story or a page or a scene together?
I don't know. I mean, that's a big question. I mean, I think to me it just begins and ends with me feeling it, right? Like
Right.
as I'm working on it. I mean, I think the comic, no matter what the story is, it's got to be more than just dudes punching each other. It's got to be more than just cool dialogue. Like there got to be those emotional beats that really make you feel something and make you invested. Whether that's a story about Wolverine fighting aliens or Thor fighting other gods, or in Southern Bastards, a guy getting beat with a stick in the middle of town. Like the you have to feel the emotional weight and connect with it in some ways. Otherwise, it's just lines on paper and
Right.
people fighting over nothing. So. But I only know how to do that in a way that affects me and that I feel, and I think as a viewer or a reader or whatever, like I just respond to whatever makes me feel something. Whether that's you make me laugh, you make me scared, you make me disturbed. Like I'm the guy who laughs at inappropriate points in movies because I'm something horrible just happens and I start laughing because I'm like, oh, I love that you just made me feel that thing, right? Like good
Yep.
job. It's my way of saying well done to you, even if it's like not something you should be laughing at. So I think I just take joy from that. I take joy from
Sure.
oh, this thing made me feel something. So it feels the same when I'm sitting down to work on something of my own. Like to me, really more than any accolades, any career that I've built, even more than, again, making money to pay the light bill, like the pure joy for me of working on comics is when I sit down and I read something that I just wrote the day before and I'm like, oh man, I like that. Like this, it makes me happy. It makes me happy in a way that really nothing else does to a consistent degree over the course of my entire life. And to the point where it's become a little bit like just a function that I have to have, to survive, like breathing, or
Right.
my heart beating. Like I need to sit down and tell stories for myself, because I have done that, going back to the playing in the yard when I was 10 years old and making up Tarzan stories and Conan stories.
I love it. Well, so you inevitably did get to do Conan.
I did.
And you said that was a big bucket list, big kind of dream come true thing there. And it's a project that allowed you to work again with Mahmud Asrar, who you are now doing Bug Wars with.
Right.
When did the Bug Wars seed get planted for you, and how long has it taken to kind of nurture and water and grow to where, just in a few short weeks you're about to see it release?
Right. Well, I think in terms of working with Mahmud part of it, it was us doing Conan. We had worked together on a one shot of Thor, Thor Generation special before that, and then I asked to do Conan with him, and thought he absolutely killed it through 12 issues of Conan the Barbarian, and then we did a King Conan miniseries. Loved everything he did on those, and also love Mahmud. He's like one of the nicest dudes in comics, and I got to hang out with him. And again, like the thing, I've been in comics long enough and done enough shows, the conventions start to blur together into one convention, so you forget, like, wait, what country were we in when we were hanging out that time, right? But gotten to hang out with Mahmud many times, and just wanted to do a book with him, right? Like with creator-owned books, it's very much about that relationship, and you want to work with somebody that you have a good relationship with. Wanted to do something with Mahmud. Thought we should do something in the fantasy vein after coming off Conan, and then I had this idea for Bug Wars. Really, the original seed of that again goes back to that backyard when I was 10 years old, and we were living in Piney Woods, Alabama, and we had a house with a huge backyard, kind of woods all around that. Spent all my time back there. My siblings were all quite a bit older than me, so I spent most of my time playing alone. Setting up Star Wars toys, He-Man action figures, running through the woods with stick swords. Had like I built like a big kind of lean-to back there, covered with old pine needles. There was a stream that went through the woods. So I very genuinely feel like that's where I became a storyteller. That's where I fell in love with stories. I mean, I was kind of a voracious reader, and I was reading a lot of, Robert E. Howard Conan. I was reading a lot of comic books, and then I was going out and doing kind of work training, and then every time I was out there playing, I was making up these elaborate fantasy sagas in my head that for the most part I never wrote down. They were just every day it was just like I'm adding another episode to the TV show with the stuff I'm making up. And part of that was, one of those early comics I read was Sword of the Atom from DC, Jan Strand and Gil Kane, where the Atom discovers this like hidden civilization of tiny barbarians who live in the Amazon jungle and ride frogs and fight rats and that sort of thing, with swords. And I love that idea. I always loved those kind of stories of tiny people, or tiny beings kind of living right beneath our feet. I loved the Littles on Saturday morning, and I loved Secret of Nim.
Secret of Nim, yep.
So I was always fascinated by stories like that, and literally I've had a version of this story in my head, I think, since then. Like it's kind of I've thought about doing it different times in different ways. Like I thought about doing an Ant-Man story at Marvel at one point. I'm glad I didn't. I kind of realized, like, no, this is mine. I want to do this somewhere else. And then, and as Mahmud and I started building that world together, and we've been working on this for a few years now, part of me was like, why the hell did I wait so long to do this? Because as somebody who grew up so in love with fantasy stories and the world building of it, and I think that's one of the things that pulled me into comics, in that first issue of The World's Finest that I read, is like such a sprawling world, the DC universe. So I think I've always loved that aspect of fantasy storytelling, and it's like, why did I wait until 20 years into my career before I did my own creator-owned fantasy story? Because I'm getting such joy from just, figuring out the different sects of they're called mites, the tiny people who live in this backyard. And this backyard in the book is my exact same backyard that I played in as a kid. The house is the same, front yard, backyard. Like I drew the map for it a really shitty map because, again, I'm terrible at drawing. But
did you just like scan in a bunch of just like old family photos to send to Mahmud to for reference, or like
yeah, I did. I like the Google mapped some photos of the house and
Okay.
the front yard, but drew a very poorly drew a map of the backyard, which the Becca Carey fixed it up and made it very nice looking for the book. And it's still supposed to be kind of like a child's drawing, but I think my version was too much like a child's drawing. So we need to make it like a child who can draw better than I can. But yeah, it is based on the yard that I played in as a kid, and it's a yard that's we find out is filled with these like warring kingdoms of mites, who each sect of mites lives with a different insect. So there's kind of the spider witches and the beetle barbarians, and the ant imperium is sort of like the Roman Empire, and the maggot monks and the wasp raiders, who are sort of like flying Vikings. So there's all these different lands, again, hidden under brush piles and in potted ferns and in, an old shed. But
say like you're a guy who admittedly like does a ton of research for anything that you do. Is there a bug fact that surprised you the most?
Well, I mean, I've learned a lot about a lot more weird and bizarre and terrifying insects than I think I ever knew about. And we'll see a lot of them in the book, in the story, and then we'll also there's back matter in each issue where we kind of again do more world building stuff and dive into like this is what the society of the beetle barbarians is like, and these are some of the weird ants that you'll find in the yard, because this yard it's a yard in a fictional town in Alabama, but it's filled with insects from all over the world. So the weirdest insects from anywhere on the planet are going to have ended up in this yard in West Bottom, Alabama. So we get like in issue 4, I think in issue 4 you meet the bombardier beetle, which is a beetle that when agitated will spray boiling hot acid from its butthole, which is scary as a full-size human being, right? You don't really want to. That's not going to kill you, but when you're the size of an insect, if you're shrunk down like Slade Slaymaker, the main character in the book is, and that butthole staring you in the face, then that's a whole different ball of wax,
for sure. And like I think the coolest thing about this, and we've seen it in a bunch of the preview pages, and you had the ash can, whatever. There is a shit ton of action in this book. How important is letting Mahmud be able to kind of run wild on some of that stuff for the very kind of very deep story that you're telling?
Yeah, I mean that was a big part of it. I mean he and I loved working on Conan together. We got to do a lot of different kinds of stories in that, but there were certainly constraints about what we could do in terms of violence or subject matter. Working with Marvel, so with this, right away we were like, we can do whatever we want. So, and it was important to sell kind of right out of the gate that, like, you think about the story of a kid who shrinks down and goes on an adventure in his backyard. You think Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, right? And we wanted to make it clear, like, this is not a kid's story. Like the main character is young, he's a teenager, but this is not a story you should let your children read. And this is I've said this is like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids meets Game of Thrones, or like the Chronicles of Narnia if they'd been written by Garth Ennis. Like that's the tone we're going for. So right out of the gate, we wanted to show like it's got war in the title, and this is a book about what war really looks like. So when the beetle clans go to war against the ant imperium, it's pretty vicious and grisly, and you get that in the first scene of the book is the beetle riders invading an anthill and running up against the armies of ants, and it's a lot of big double page spreads, huge panels, huge battle scenes that Mahmud went crazy with. So it's to sort of set the stakes of like, this is what this world is like. It's pretty brutal and vicious, and there's a lot of history here. There's a lot of world building there, and then we kind of introduce the segue to the human-sized part of the story and the family that's just moved into the old house there, and there's a lot of family drama that's happening, and there's a connection with the dead father who died in that house and has a connection to the yard that we don't know about. So really it's a family story. It's about a kid fighting to literally save the life of his family, just in the middle of this like dark fantasy landscape spread across his own backyard.
Love that. How much of the main character being a teen is inferred based on your own experiences as a teen dad?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, he's a lot of me. There's probably a lot of my son in there too. My son's been super excited about the book, and he's been reading it, along the way. Gives me notes at times. So yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, and Slade, the main character, is he's not an athletic kid. He's like super skinny, bit of a nerd. Relates to insects more than he does other human beings. He's got one older brother. They have a really contentious relationship, to say the least. And his brother's got his own issues, and he's had his own past traumatic experiences with bugs, and he hates this house with a passion, hates that they're there, and his anger, is kind of one of the big parts of setting the story in motion.
I love it. Before I let you go, I got two more questions for you. One is, obviously, I know you're a big wrestling fan. What's exciting you these days in the world of wrestling? The Netflix era has begun in WWE land, and we got Kenny Omega back over at AEW. What are you digging?
Yeah, very, very happy about all those things. I mean, as I said, I moved a couple months ago. I had a very busy travel schedule last year, so in the midst of that, I realized like there's a lot of wrestling. There's a lot of wrestling to keep up with. It's hard. It's hard to keep up, right? I got to read all these comics. I got to watch all this wrestling. It's a tough life. It's a tough life to do all that.
Look, I've always said, wrestling to me is the closest thing to live action comics that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I agree.
We've got. It's good guys, bad guys. It's serialized storytelling. It's got costumes. It's comics.
Yeah, sometimes magic powers. Sometimes,
right.
Anytime that there's a wedding, it's going to go poorly. Right. Yeah, I agree. Like, I love the storytelling of wrestling and how they can tell a story over the course of a match. How they can shift and change the storytelling from week to week based on what people thought of the pay-per-view the night before or whatever. Yeah. I love all that. I'm a big wrestling fan. I just AEW was just in town here in Kansas City like a month ago, and so got to go. And Brody King, who's one of the wrestlers there, is awesome. Was in the House of Black. He's a big comic fan, so got to go backstage and hang out with him, and talked comic books with Chris Jericho, which was cool.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I'm a big wrestling fan. I've met CM Punk, and he's another big comic guy, and I'm happy. Things are going well for him and WWE, and man, they've been firing on all cylinders over there, and they got their roster is just so stacked top to bottom. It's pretty ridiculous.
Who do you acknowledge as your tribal chief?
I've always been a Roman guy. I've always loved. I mean, I kind of first, I got into wrestling with my kid. I mean, I watched it when I was a kid, like back in the old, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man days. But when I started getting into it with my kid was like the days of the Shield. So I loved all those dudes. So I've always been a Roman guy, and man, his heel run was so great, and all the stuff with the bloodline and Paul Heyman, like, wrestling it's sort of like Doctor Who,
Right.
there are episodes where you're like, well, I wish I could have those hours back. Like I could have skipped that one. But when they get it right, you're like, holy shit, like that's really good.
Yeah.
Like you're looking around like, does anybody else realize how good this is? That was damn good.
Look, it's almost I wish. Like if Roman and Paul were eligible for awards, man, they 100% deserve them because
yeah, it's been great.
It was so
Sami, Sami Zayn,
yeah,
like the Usos, everybody who's been a part of the Bloodline stuff has really excelled. So yeah, I'm excited for all that. But yeah, I love AEW. I'm excited to see Kenny Omega back. Huge Kenny Omega fan. I love the Young Bucks. I love Will Ospreay. I'm happy to see Ricochet there in AEW. So it's still they've got so many great wrestlers. They've had a ton of people out sick, or out hurt.
Yeah, it's great to see a bunch of folks really.
For sure
to come on back
for sure.
So, all right, last question I've got for you, and to put you on the spot a little bit, but a thing that I'm starting to do because it's stuff that's influenced how I read comics and how I've been introduced to comics. I'd love for you if you could pick one book that is not something you've written that you would recommend to someone to read, whether or not they've read comics or not. And then secondly, could you is there a book of yours that, obviously I'm not asking you to pick your favorite child, but that you would want to give to a fan that you feel is pure Jason Aaron?
Those are good questions. I mean, the first part, some of it would depend on who this person is and kind of what they're into, right? I don't think I would have a blanket answer just for everybody. I mean, there's like a shelf, there's a couple of shelves of books that are behind my desk are just all my favorite stuff by different people, right? So there's a lot of Grant Morrison on there, Frank Miller, Garth Ennis, lots and lots of Kirby. Alan Moore stuff. So again, it depends on who the person is. I mean, those Garth Ennis Punisher books. If you're a person who can handle those books, if that's something you're looking for, like his run of Punisher Max, those 60 or so issues, however many it was, are stellar to me. Really, really stellar comics. They're just very, very brutal. So maybe that's the thing I would recommend, and maybe it would be, Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol. If you're into very weird superhero stories, that's my favorite weird superhero story. Or maybe it's, Frank Miller, David Mazzucchelli, Batman Year One, which
can't go wrong with classic.
Yeah, never gets old. So, but I read kind of a little bit of everything. So I grew up reading. The Batman and New Teen Titans and X-Men, but also First Comics and Eclipse Comics and Flaming Carrot, and in the 80s there was just that explosion of just so much stuff across the board that was so cool. So I think that's all I've always kind of read a little bit of everything. But if I'm going to pick something, it is hard. It does feel like I'm choosing between my own children, and some of them are going to be upset and jealous. But I mean, if again, might depend on the person.
Sure.
Maybe I'm like, well, here's Southern Bastards, or here's Wolverine and the X-Men, and those are two very, very different books. But
for sure.
I mean, I think the thing that I still feel special for a lot of reasons, and I think came together in the best way possible in terms of not just my contribution to it, but the art and the emotional weight of it and everything, was the Mighty Thor stuff, like the Jane Foster story, like beginning to end. I feel like is. Just a book I still go back to a lot, that people still like are very affected by that book, and I'll do signings and we all start crying, and So that one feels special to me, and I'm really, really proud of it, and I think it will hopefully stand the test of time, and so probably that.
I love that. Jason, we're going to have to do this again sometime because we basically just only got to cover really what felt like the first half of your career, and there's so much.
Yeah, we didn't even get to Superman or
it's Star Wars and Superman,
Teenage
and
Mutant Ninja Turtles,
and all that stuff. And so we'll have to do this again, and where we've got a little bit more time to just dig in, maybe get a little more nitty gritty on some of that stuff because I could talk to you about this all day, but we only have so much time.
Well, I mean, I don't plan on going anywhere, Jim. Like, this is all
perfect.
This is all I know how to do. I have no other marketable skills, so I plan on being here.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Jason, thank you so much for taking the time today. For everyone listening, thank you so much. Make sure you check out Bug Wars, which is on sale in February. It's going to be a book that everyone's talking about. You don't want that FOMO for sure. And so make sure you go pick it up. But Jason, thanks again, man.
Thank you.
Well, you've made it to the end of another episode of Let's Talk Comics. Congratulations. Usually, this is where people just click off. I feel like I should put in a code word or something where, like, if you tweet it or something, then we'll give you a free comic book or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But if you've made it this far, thank you. Cannot appreciate the fact that you have made it this far and listened to it and continue to listen to it. I'm going to be, the gratitude is going to flow until I'm blue in the face, because honestly, it is because of you that me, can do this. So keep on listening, keep on telling your friends. I mentioned earlier in the show, some of the best ways to support the show is to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. It would mean the world to me if you did that. And again, if I read them, we'll send some stickers out, I promise. If you want to get involved or engaged, social media is a total dumpster fire right now, but you can find me, Image, Let's Talk Comics everywhere. Instagram, Blue Sky, you name it, we are there at all the respective handles. At Jim Biscardi, at Image Comics, at Let's Talk Comics. And look, I will always give a retweet. I will always give a like for anyone who says nice things about the show, anyone who shares the show, any and all of that. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. So with all that being said, stay tuned for the next one. We've got a killer list of folks coming to the show. I cannot wait for you guys to check them out and listen to them. And as always, every Wednesday or Tuesday or really any day of the week, but head on out to your local comic book shop, pick up a comic that maybe you wouldn't necessarily but want to try, right? Those retailers and the local comic book shops are the lifeblood of this business. We couldn't do it without them, and we appreciate everything that they do. So go do me a favor and go pick up a book. It could be an Image book. It could be a Marvel book. I mean, it should be an Image book, but it could be whatever book. I don't care. Just read some comics because they are the best art form, period. And they're the best method of storytelling, and I will say that until the day I die. So go read some comics because we're going to keep talking about them. We'll catch you next time.